tombstone, all alone and lost. For a life of sin, I have paid the cost.
When I pass by, all the people say,
Here goes another guy out on the lost highway. The lost highway.
The peace of the world for generations, maybe centuries to come, will depend not just on America's military might, which is the greatest in the world.
Republican presidents have often visited the spiritual home of country music, the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville, because country has always been seen as representing the forces of conservatism and tradition.
Our willingness to not only wear the flag, but for stand up for the flag, and country music does that.
But its safe image hides an independent spirit, a maverick streak that constantly refreshes this mainstream.
Whiskey River, take my mind. Don't let a memory haunt me.
It's healthy for music to have these disparate voices challenge Nashville.
Country worships cowboy pride, those who've gone their own way and taken chances.
They talked about drinking and cheating and going to jail. Eventually, I got involved in all those activities myself.
This is the story of the outsiders who've taken country music beyond Nashville.
There'll always be a rebel. There's a bit of Jesse James in it.
Thank you all very much.
The man who for many defines the term outsider burst onto the scene in the 50s. He became a country legend, the man in black, Johnny Cash.
Johnny Cash had that straight ahead, "Hi, I'm Johnny Cash," and if you don't like that, I'm sorry.
Hello, I'm Johnny Cash.
He was like this dark, dangerous, exciting-looking thing.
San Quentin, you've been living hell to me. You blistered me since 1963.
Johnny Cash took on the toughest gigs in town, like San Quentin Prison, where he left a lasting impression on a convicted burglar, set to be a country legend himself.
It was a day for the convicts. You know, he had a lot of competition. He had good-looking ladies singing, and there was strippers. He was chewing gum, and he was the most arrogant son of a bitch I think I've ever seen on stage.
May your walls fall and may I live to tell.
But somehow he pulled it off and just stole the entire spotlight. I bet you there's a convict that was in that audience could tell you who else was on that show that day. It didn't matter.
San Quentin, I hate every inch of you.
Johnny Cash recorded at the Nashville studio of Columbia Records. An aspiring young songwriter worked there as a janitor.
I was probably a big pain in the ass for a while for John, because I gave him every song I ever wrote, and I wasn't supposed to because I worked there, you know, but I would give them to him through Luther Perkins, his guitar player. And Luther used to tell me, "John loves your song. He was singing it on the way to the airplane." I always hoped that John was going to cut one of my songs, and he had never got around to doing that until Sunday morning coming down. Well, I woke up Sunday morning with no way to hold my head. It didn't hurt.
And the beer I had for breakfast wasn't bad, so I had one more for dessert.
Well, it was straight autobiography for me. I was living in a condemned apartment and had lost my family. And Sunday was the day when the bars were closed, and it was not a day to be alone.
My face and comb my hair and stumble down the stairs to meet the day.
When you hear an artist like Johnny Cash recording Sunday Morning Coming Down, then you see, you know, an enormous barrier being broken. The grand man of country music doing a song that is basically about drinking and smoking dope.
And a Sunday morning coming down.
And then it goes on, you know. Talked about smoking your brains out, you know, and said on the Sunday morning sidewalk, wishing, Lord, that I was stoned. Now that line, they wanted John to take out when he recorded. He recorded it on his TV show, and they took it straight for a record. But I remember watching them all sitting around giving him ideas of what to sing instead. And I think Bob Tubert said he could have, who's a songwriter, who said, well, maybe you could say, wishing, Lord, that I was home. And John looked at me and I said, it's not the same thing. and I didn't know what he was going to do until he sang it that night on the show. And I was up in the balcony. I almost fell out of the balcony because he looked up at me and he says, wishing, Lord, that I was stoned. And I said, ah.
Well, it was an honest thing that needed to be brought out there and spoken about intelligently, as Chris can do it. And timing is everything. He came along just when we needed him.
Song of the Year for 1970, Sunday Morning Coming Down,
Chris Christopherson was propelled into the spotlight at the Country Music Awards, but his unorthodox appearance caused uproar that day.
What happened was I was sitting behind Merle Haggard and I thought he was going to win it. And when they said that my song won, I fell back against the pew and banged my head on the wood there. And I hadn't listened to how I was supposed to get up on the stage, you know, where you were supposed to go, because I didn't think that I had a prayer. So I kind of stumbled up on the stage and was trying to think of something to say.
Let's see. Appreciate it.
I think Marty and Merle must have been laying out. I want to thank Johnny Cash, and I'm glad I wasn't against Today I Started Loving You Again.
I remember Bill Anderson, the songwriter, said that was the shrewdest move you made. He said you got more publicity out of that than anybody on the whole show, just because you looked like you were stoned up there. but I wasn't. I might have been drunk.
Nashville was used to doing things in a more sober way.
I wake up with sunshine, lay beside me.
In the early 70s, Nashville's Music Row was a creatively stalled place, obsessed with trying to marry country to pop.
Country music is basically conservative. If conservative means you don't want, in essence, a lot of changes.
Breakfast in bed, you know you make me so happy.
Throughout the 60s and 70s especially, Nashville came to be completely a producer's town. There were a handful of producers that literally ruled the town. They signed the artists, they decided what songs they would record, they decided what musicians would play on it, and pretty much it was a real feudal system here. And the artists were the peasants, so you can imagine what that does to a true artistic spirit.
Well, you pretty much put your career in their hands, and you did that voluntarily when you signed that little piece of paper for 4 years. So you were pretty much locked in.
I'm crazy. Crazy for feeling so lonely. And I'm crazy.
Willie Nelson had come to Nashville in 1960, but he'd never quite been able to turn his success as a songwriter into a recording career. He'd written classics like Crazy, but couldn't seem to save the right song for himself.
as long as you want it.
People in Nashville didn't believe that Willie had a commercial voice, you know. They didn't see him as the stylist that he is.
You'd leave me for somebody new.
I had a pretty good following on the road and traveling, but what I was doing wasn't coming out on the record. And I felt like if we could have got into the studio with the band and doing it the way we're doing it every night, we would have had a better chance.
Wondering what in the world did I do?
Willie had to get out. He chose to go to Austin in his home state of Texas, a town with a thriving live music scene, a melting pot of musical styles where Willie could explore his freewheeling instincts away from the limits of Nashville. And the best place to play in town was the newly opened Armadillo World Headquarters, a willfully subversive venue.
I opened the place for us, the counterculture. First year we sold no beer. I promised the landlord I won't do that. He was a school board member. He didn't want to get in trouble. So we just took LSD and smoked a lot of pot. I was determined to get Willie to play Armadillo, and turned around one night, and there he was looking at me with his hand sticking out. And I said, I've been looking for you. And he said, well, you found me. I said, I want you to play here. And he said, well, I want to play here. We had a hard time getting along. I almost got mobbed one night when I said to a hippie crowd of rock and rollers, and in 3 weeks we've got Willie Nelson coming, and nobody said a damn thing. I said it again real loud, and about 3 or 4 people clapped, and I screamed, he's only the Bob Dylan of country music, you hippie assholes.
All right. Now Shotgun Willie sits around in his underwear.
First time I saw Willie there, I thought he was an insurance salesman. He had short hair and was wearing polyester sport clothes. I had no idea that that was the Willie Nelson.
Well, you can't make a record if you ain't got nothing to say.
It was just heaven. I mean, Willie was so far ahead of anything those kids associated with country music.
And you can't play music if you don't know nothing to play. Well, now Shotgun Willie sits
At the time, the audience was split in two, hippies and rednecks, and each kept very much to themselves. But Willie Nelson's music brought them together.
I mean, Willie Nelson changed my life in more ways than music. When Willie Nelson moved to Texas, I stopped getting my ass kicked so much. There were all these cowboys, you know, kicking, you know, long hairs that were sitting down on the dance floor trying to watch the show, and Willie stopped the show in the middle and he said, there's room for some to listen and for some to dance.
I had a feeling that once they got together, everything would be really good. And sure enough, it was.
This newfound freedom spilled over into the studio, where Willie produced 2 distinctive albums.
His records started to sound like his live shows, which is what the audiences wanted. Of course, they didn't want the sort of sterile, antiseptic studio productions that he had received before. So it began to have that kind of organic flow and feel like a live good time show in Texas.
But it was with the release of Red-Headed Stranger in 1975 that the public finally caught up with Willie Nelson. An atmospheric concept album, its linked songs and ballads tell an epic story of love and betrayal in the Old West.
The first time I heard Red-Headed Stranger, I was just devastated by it.
In twilight, I see her. Thank you very much.
I couldn't believe that he had actually pulled this off.
Blue eyes crying in the rain.
He'd pulled together old songs and new songs and a very spare sort of sound, and had really produced a western, southwestern epic in song.
And love is like a dying ember, and only memories remain. And through I'll remember. Blue eyes crying in the rain.
If you listen to what was on radio at the time, it was these big productions, these kind of thick productions, and Willie's was sparse.
So sparse that when Willie's record company first heard it, they thought they were listening to a demo.
The guy who was the head of Columbia Records at the time walked down to tell Willie that Columbia was not going to release the album. It just was going to be scrapped. And he got in the room, and basically Willie talked him out of it, said, and insisted that it be released. That's what he wanted out, and Columbia said, well, we don't think it's very good, but it's got your name on it, so there it goes. It's one of the standard albums of all time now.
Blue eyes crying in the rain.
But Austin wasn't the only town to challenge Nashville. Bakersfield, California was the original capital of alternative country. Migrants from the Texas and Oklahoma Dust Bowls in the 30s Depression had kept their music alive there. The Bakersfield sound shot to prominence in the 50s with the music of Buck Owens.
I couldn't stand all the silky, syrupy stuff that was coming out of Nashville. You know, everything is, oh, so sweet. Oh, don't play too loud there, Harry. Oh, God, somebody might think you got some personality. You know, it was awful to me. But here, you immediately had these edgy musicians, my musicians. They played on the edge of speeding, edge of making a beat go faster, but not faster, but up there, where it made you want to get up and dance, baby.
There's a place down the street we call Sam's Place. Yeah, and it starts to jump every evening when the sun goes down. And you can always find me down at Sam's Place, 'cause that's where the gang all hangs around. That's old Jimmy, shake Tina. She hails the Pasadena. She always got a big smile on her face. That's old Hoochie Coochie Hattie. She comes from Cincinnati. Yeah, there's always a party at Sam's Place. And I'll meet you tonight at Sam's Place.
I think Nashville felt that Bakersfield was a bad smell that they wished would go away. You know, it really had nothing to do with the scene in Nashville, but country radio loved that music, so they had, you know, there was a certain coexistence that had to go on.
Country radio has always dominated country music. It's often the only way for the music to be heard. Buck made sure his songs burst out of car radio speakers.
AM radio was all we had. But the bass, you know what a VU meter is, it's what they have when they record. And when the guy hits the bass and it takes up 40% of the VU meter, means you got 60% left for everything else. So I said, you know, get that bass out. I don't want to, and many times they're just rumbling around all over the record, you know. And so that's really what happened. If you listen to my records, you'd say, boy, he hated bass, didn't he? Well, I didn't really hate bass. I liked bass, but I liked bass in accordance with everything else. My music had a little pizzazz to it, as my good friend Harlan Howard would say. I remember the day we wrote Tiger with a Tail. I was riding down the road. He was touring with me down in Texas. And he pitched the lyric up in the front seat and said, here, now put the hydromatic to it. He used to call it hydromatic. And what he meant was the freight train sound, the on top of the beat. I've got a tiger by the tail, it's plain to see. Yeah, won't be much when you get through with me. I'm a losing weight and turning mighty pale. Oh, looks like I've got a tiger by the tail.
I've got a tiger by the tail, it's
Some people play back of the beat, real laid back. Others play kind of medium, get right in the middle. I played up on top of whatever the top was. I just felt it like that.
Looks like I've got a tiger by the tail.
That sound was called the Bakersfield sound because of those musicians living and working there in nightclubs. But ironically, the sound that was the Bakersfield sound was recorded, for the most part, in Hollywood at the beautiful Stacker Records building over on Vine Street, the Capitol Records Tower.
It was here that the unique talent of record producer Ken Nelson was instrumental in Buck Owens' success.
What made Buck a great performer was that he loved the public, number one, and he felt that he was giving them something. And he would get out there and just wow the audience.
When Buck and most guys went in to record those songs, the music had a very immediate connection to those honky-tonks and dance halls because they were playing them the following Thursday and Friday and Saturday nights again. And they were writing some of those songs on the way to and from those shows.
They're gonna put me in the movies. They're gonna make a big star out of me.
We would get to the studio, and he knew what sound he wanted. He knew what kind of arrangement he wanted. He was he was Buck Owens.
To his knowledge of all the records I ever made for him, he never heard one of them before I recorded it. He never knew if I was going to bring 3 trombones and a Salvation Army drum.
Ken Nelson's hands-off approach was the very opposite of the Nashville system, and it gave Bakersfield freedom to create its unique style. It had many followers.
The Beatles were fans of Buck, and they asked me to send them dubs of everything that Buck recorded. If I recorded a session with Buck, I would send it to the Beatles. And let me see, they recorded one of his songs, Act Naturally, I believe. And but they were fans of Buck.
They weren't Little Richard things, Chuck Berry things, and Buck Owens things. You know, I thought, man, what nice company that is.
2, 3, 4. All I gotta do is act naturally.
The music scene in Bakersfield essentially grew out of the western migration of the Okies from Oklahoma, primarily in the Midwest after the Dust Bowl. They were country people, and they took their music with them.
The Dust Bowl past of the Okies was given voice by another great Bakersfield artist, Merle Haggard.
It's a big job just getting by with 9 kids and a wife. Yeah, but I've been a working man, dang near all my life, and I'll keep on working.
I think Merle Haggard was the next Hank Williams because he was the most articulate songwriter, the voice of that generation. You know, Bob Dylan was the voice of the college students' generation. Merle Haggard was the voice of the working man. You know, how do you survive day to day? He spoke for those people.
Mama's Hungry Eyes was written about a period in America where there were places like labor camps, and there was a lot of people that was in these labor camps that weren't ignorant, and they weren't a lot of things that Steinbeck thought they were. My aunt and Uncle Esker lived in a canvas-covered cabin beside the railroad track in Houston, California. And I got to visit them once in a while and really get to know those people and see the impact that the Depression had on them. And Mama's Hungry Eyes probably tells that story best.
A canvas-covered cabin in a crowded labor camp. Stand out in this memory I revive 'Cause my daddy raised a family there with 2 hard-working hands and tried to feed my mama's hungry eyes. He dreamed of something better, and my mama's faith was strong, and us kids were just too young to realize that another class of people put us somewhere just below. One more reason for my mama's hungry eyes. Oh, I still recall my mama's hungry eyes.
When I first started to record Merle, I became so enamored with his singing that I would forget what else was going on. And I suddenly, hey, wait a minute, there's a musician here that you've got to worry about. But his songs, he was a great writer.
Merle Haggard drew inspiration from every aspect of his life.
My dad passed away when I was 9. And I don't know if you've ever thought about somebody you've lost and you say, I wonder what so-and-so would think about this. And I was driving on Interstate 40, saw a sign that said 19 miles to Muskogee. Muskogee was always referred to in my childhood as back home. So I saw that sign on my whole childhood flashed before my eyes, and I thought, I wonder what Dad would think about the youthful uprising that was occurring at the time, the Janis Joplins, and you know, and I understood him. I got along with it, but I thought, what if he was to come alive at this moment? And I thought, what a way to describe the kind of people in America that are still sitting in the center of the country saying, what is going on these campuses?
We don't smoke marijuana in Muskogee. We don't take our trips on LSD. We don't burn our draft cards down on Main Street. 'Cause we like living right and being free.
The song struck a chord with the die-hard traditional audience of the Country Music Association.
We like holding hands.
But somehow it also appealed to younger fans, like the crowd at the Armadillo in Austin.
We don't let our hair grow long and shaggy.
We all sang it. We adopted it. It was kind of funny, you know. It was like we knew Merle better than that.
I'm proud to be an Okie from Muskogee, a place where even squares can have a ball. We still wave Old Glory down at the courthouse in Muskogee, Oklahoma, USA.
Merle Haggard was also a surprisingly inspirational presence for another much younger California-based performer, Graham Parsons, whose Flying Burrito Brothers were early pioneers of country rock. Graham Parsons was passionate about country music's simple poetry. He was equally passionate about rock music. At a time when they were poles apart, he alone thought they belonged together. His songs and his voice had an almost childlike vulnerability.
Graham was a good songwriter who, if he'd lived another 3 or 4 years, would have been a great songwriter.
'Cause I'm the one who showed you how to do the things you're doing now.
I really do believe that there probably never would have been a country rock movement if there hadn't been Graham Parsons. And there wouldn't have been Linda Ronstadt. There wouldn't be the Eagles. There would possibly not have been a Fleetwood Mac. There might not have been some of the Rolling Stones music. And there wouldn't have been an Emmylou Harris.
In his brief solo career, Graham Parsons' affinity for country found its fullest expression in his duets with Emmylou Harris.
I would say until I met Graham and started working with him, didn't really understand or have a real love or a feel for country music. Like most of my generation, you know, country music was politically incorrect for us at that point. It was associated with Republicans and right wing and that sort of thing. He taught me the beauty in the poetry, the simplicity, the honesty in the music. And the love of harmony came from really singing with him.
Love hurts, love scars, love wounds, and mars any heart not tough nor strong enough to take a lot of pain, take a lot of pain.
When I listen to Graham Parsons sing with Emmylou, I feel the kind of melancholy that only comes from youthful innocence. It was not just music of the jaded and whiskey-soaked. It was also able to be the music of the disillusioning experiences of youth.
It came very naturally. Graham really didn't have to tell me what to do. I was Ginger Rogers to his Fred Astaire. I mean, he was leading and I was following, but it just was as natural as breathing.
No one will ever know what Graham's collaboration with Emmylou could have achieved. In 1973, just before the release of his second album, Graham was found dead of a drug overdose in the Joshua Tree Motel, California. He was 26 years old. His story ended with a macabre twist.
Graham's road manager had made a pact with Graham that whichever one of them died first, the other would cremate his body at Joshua Tree, the place they loved in the desert there. They stole a hearse, drove out into the desert, all drunk as church mice, and set the body and the coffin on fire. But it didn't burn completely, and I think police started arriving and they fled and left what was partially burned of Graham. It was certainly one of the oddest ends to a country story we've ever seen.
Emmylou Harris was now committed to country and picked up where Graham Parsons had left off.
My whole artistic life was bound up in working with him, and that's all I really wanted to do. So I had to figure out a way. It was almost like, well, what would Graham do?
I don't want to hear a love song. I got on this airplane just to fly, and I know there's life below me, but all that you can show me is the prairie and the sky.
There are several things about Emmylou that one must admire. First of all is the voice. It's one of the finest, most shimmering instruments in country music history.
This incredible respect her songs.
I was in the wilderness.
Integrity, all the things that country music, represents.
She finally wrote about Graham's death in 1975.
Coming down to wash me clean.
Boulder to Birmingham is Emmy dealing with something very, very personal in her life.
Baby, do you know what I mean? I will rock my soul in the bosom of Abraham.
I suppose it was dealing with Graham's death. It was cathartic for me, but I don't know. I still don't know where songs come from. It's a mystery.
From Boulder to Birmingham, if I thought I could see your face. If I thought I could see your face.
By the mid-70s, it seemed as if Nashville was under siege from alternative voices with different ways of doing things. Even artists inside the system were beginning to demand independence. Waylon Jennings was an ex-rock and roller who had played with Buddy Holly. His resentment of the Nashville system was soon coming out in his songs.
Somebody told me when I came to Nashville, son, you finally got it made. Old Hank made it here. We're all sure that you will, but I don't think Hank done it this way. Did old Hank really do it this way?
He was from West Texas, and he grew up with all that independence that people normally have in that area. It's a good trait, and I think that's what got him labeled an outlaw.
Outlaw was a term that was being applied to Willie, Waylon, and any other renegade.
Willie and Waylon were sort of doing the same thing on different trails, on different rails. Willie was in Austin, plotting out what he was going to do. And Waylon was kicking ideas around at the same time and figuring out it's time to kick over the traces and take over the school.
Waylon had a reputation as the gun-toting tough guy of country. It took another Texan to write the songs that gave shape to Waylon's outlaw music. He had to be just as tough to get through to Waylon.
I went to Nashville. Finally, I caught him in the Studio A of RCA. He came out of the control booth and he had a couple of bikers. Bikers hung around Waylon a lot, and he had some pretty tough-looking customers. And I'd had enough, I just said, "Hey, Waylon." And he turned and glared at me. I said, I got these songs that you claim you was gonna listen to. And if you don't listen to them, I'm gonna whip your ass right here in front of everybody. And boy, man, everything got quiet. And them old boys started forming, and Waylon stopped them. And he said, "Hoss," he said, "you don't know how close you come to getting killed." I said, "Well, I've had enough." I said, "You done told me you was gonna do this. Now I'm full of songs, and I want you to listen to them." So I played him Honky Tonk Heroes. And then he scared me because he came up with that ending thing that started, and it went real fast. And I tell you what, that was a brainchild.
Where does it go? The good Lord only knows. Seemed like it was just the other day. I was down in Green Gables, hogging them tables, and chilly blowing all of my hard-earned pay. My Annie Roe blues, that ain't holes in the shoe. There weren't another other way to be. Oh, that love.
Waylon knew a good song when he heard one, but he needed an independent studio that would give him freedom to make his own sound. It was provided by Hillbilly Central.
You just can't believe how different everything sounded when he moved from RCA. The bottom was fat and big again, and it was like he was on the road. You could hear the drum. It wasn't a little tick in the back. was marvelous.
Once Hillbilly Central really became Waylon and Tom Paul's headquarters, it was a 24-hour operation, people coming and going all hours of day and night, recording when you want to. So it was a very loose operation, not the sort of thing you could do at RCA studios. So.
Honky-tonky blows like me. Waylon, what are you doing?
The Outlaws were defined by their looks, their music, and their attitude, but it was never an organized movement.
As far as I'm concerned, it's someone wanting to play their music the way they want to play their music. It has nothing to do with anything else.
It was sort of a boys' club of Willie, Waylon, Tom Paul, and their friends, just kind of raising hell, sticking their tongue out at the establishment, and being pleasantly surprised that they could get away with it.
Anyone in Nashville who double-parked on Music Row began calling themselves Outlaws. RCA saw this, packaged some old recordings by Waylon, Willie, and Tom Paul, and called it Wanted the Outlaws.
The appearance and the marketing of the album were extremely important in making a Nashville album look hip for the first time.
That's the way we all looked at that time anyway. We just have to clean up sometimes when we went out.
More by accident than design, the Outlaws had revitalized the home of country music.
People were so hungry for something different that was on the radio that they just ate it up. And it sold 1 million the first 2 weeks. It went on up to 5 million.
The winner is Wanted, the Outlaws, accepting
At the 1976 Country Music Association Awards, it was voted Album of the Year.
That was the first gold record to come out of Nashville, strictly country. All of a sudden, it broke a barrier. Said, hey, we can get gold records out of here. Also, musically, it broke some rules because musically, Nashville fit into a formula. The Outlaws produced a record that wasn't manufactured off the factory line, and people reacted to that.
On behalf of me and old Waylon, Jesse and Tom Paul, thank y'all very much.
After the Outlaw album hit, you suddenly saw everyone wearing a cowboy hat with feathers in it. And then it gradually morphed into what became the urban cowboy movement, which was the sort of ridiculous extreme of dressing up and playing cowboy.
If you're trying to get that authentic Texas look with the official Western hats, boots, belts, buckles, jackets, well, you can find it just about any place in the country now, even the east side of New York, right here at the corner of 68th and Madison.
Country was in danger of becoming a fashion item. Everyone wanted to buy the clothes and adopt the look, but the music itself struggled to be heard. For 10 years, artists like Dwight Yoakam had to fight to find an audience. He may have looked like he'd been dressed by Madison Avenue, but in country music terms, Dwight Yoakam was the real thing.
The band that I formed got hired and fired from a lot of different places in quick repetition. I wasn't doing what was urban cowboy music. I was going to do traditional country music.
It won't hurt when I fall down from this bar stool. It won't hurt when I stumble.
We'd tell them what we were going to do. I guess they just didn't hear what I said or didn't believe that I meant what I said when I said we were going to show up and play hardcore country music. That's the term I would use. Hardcore country music. Didn't know how much more graphic I could be.
Dwight Yoakam grew up in Kentucky, and when he was 22, he moved to California, where he developed his own slant on the classic Bakersfield sound of Buck Owens.
We were reinterpreting the kind of Bakersfield shuffle sound of Buck Owens and what he was doing with that very terse kind of shuffle. His singing style, that elongated at times, pronunciation of a word. For instance, in the song Tiger by the Tail, where he's, I've got a tiger by the tail. It's playing. had an impact on me when I was a kid. You know, before I ever came to California, I was listening. That was on pop radio, and so I wrote a song titled "Little Ways." You got your little ways to hurt me, you know, just tear me up and leave me in small pieces.
By the mid-'80s, outsiders like Dwight Yoakam were creating a new mood in country music by reinventing the traditional sounds they'd grown up with for a contemporary audience. They became known as the New Traditionalists.
You've got your... On any given night, I might...
Randy Travis was part of this movement. He brought classic vocals back to the music.
And hold you close to me all night long.
I remember sitting at coming up to a stoplight at Trousdale and Harding Place. I still remember it. And he came on the radio with On the Other Hand. It was like, whoa, finally, country again. And Randy Travis is the real thing. He's got a juvenile delinquent background, and he can sing like crazy.
In your arms I feel the passions I thought had died. When I looked into your eyes, I found myself.
When Randy Travis came out, it was like new traditionalism, and people went, oh, this is cool. And it was really what country music had been 20 years before.
My favorite singers of all time have always been, and always will be, Merle Haggard, George Jones, Lefty Frizzell, Hank Williams Sr.
But on the other hand, there's a golden band to remind me of...
Even as a kid at 8 years old, when I started singing and playing, their style of singing had an impact on me. Probably didn't know what I was singing about a lot of times, but there was just something about that sound I liked, and I tried to copy what they did. On one hand, I could stay and be your loving man, but the reason I must go is on the other hand.
It was the first time I had heard music that reminded me of my parents' music, but it was updated and modern and very cool, it seemed like something very fresh and very new.
They always lumped me, Randy Travis, and Dwight Yoakam together because our first records came out literally the same month. Dwight and I on the same day. And we really were doing three completely different things. What I was doing was completely original material. My intention when I came here was to be a singer-songwriter.
Hey, pretty baby, don't you know it ain't my fault? Love to hear the steel bells humming on the asphalt. Wake up in the middle of the night in a truck stop, stumble in a restaurant, wondering why I don't stop. Well, I gotta keep rocking while I still can. Got a two-pack habit and a motel tape. When my boots hit the boards, I'm a brand.
Steve Earle was one of the first Nashville artists to embrace mainstream rock.
When I saw Springsteen do Born in the USA, it became very clear to me that there should always be a song that's a really personal statement. That's where, the reason for the song to exist comes from something I really need to say about myself. I think to truck drivers it sounded familiar, and they thought it was about them even though it was about me. Anyone that travels for a living can relate to.
But I heard someone calling my name one day, and I followed that voice down a lost highway. Everybody tell me.
If he'd only known it, Steve Earle's rock leanings held the clue to the next assault on the country citadel. A one-man, 10-ton truck of an act from Oklahoma was about to smash its way into the business.
I remember his audition day very well because he ran in here late, and I still have his application from that day, and I remember writing late across the top. He sang a song, and the audience went crazy for it.
Blame it all on my roots. I showed up in boots and ruined your black tie affair.
It was one of those magic Bluebird moments. In years of Sunday Night Writers' Nights, we have had very, very few standing ovations, and that's the first one I remember. Not at the end of his performance, but at the end of the song. So if anybody ever asks, you know, that he's really talented, I can tell you, oh yeah, he really is. In this small room with no band and no trapezes and everything else, he really came across.
He was Garth Brooks, and his music became so popular so quickly that he didn't just come to dominate the industry. Before long, he was the industry.
He took the barriers of country music and busted them. Garth grew up on rock and roll. Garth grew up on watching Kiss and those theater glam rock groups, you know.
Most country artists before that time had just walked out on stage and sang. Nothing flashy, just a spotlight on you, and that was pretty much it. He turned the show part into a rock show, but kept the music country.
And that appealed to young fans, because young fans don't just want to see music, they want to see an event. And he fulfilled that.
He had a degree in marketing and was savvy enough to get Capitol Records to back his album with a whole year's promotional budget. The gamble paid off, as Garth's brand of country swept all before it.
The rest of us are in the country music industry. He's kind of in the business of Garth.
His sales rocketed, 30 million, 40 million. Comparisons with all that had gone before were meaningless. In terms of all-time record sales, Garth Brooks was soon second only to the Beatles. But there was a downside for country music as a whole.
The people who made Garth Brooks a big star are not country music fans. They are pop music fans who have found pop music in a country setting. He's the only country artist they've ever bought. That's the only country show they're ever going to go to. You can't market to those people. You can't build an industry on those people.
Okay, so you got a car. That don't impress me much.
In the rush to repeat the success of Garth Brooks, the record companies took fewer risks and spent more and more money promoting a handful of artists. The costs were just too high for new voices to stand a chance.
Ask yourself, you're the head of a company, you've got a huge overhead, and you've got to meet it every quarter or else you're out of business. Would you go for some guy who's going to take 3 albums and 3 years to break, or do you want to put out something where within 3 months it sold 1 million copies? By golly, you go with something that's already proven, hit it, and then if they don't hit again, drop them, go on to something else.
For the first time in the economic history of country music, they cut off the past. And all of a sudden, the radio adverts said, it's not your father's country music. We got rid of all the twangy stuff. There's no cry in your beer music. Well, then what the hell is it? The problem is, it's just another form of pop. And as we know, pop music comes and goes like that.
But even in a desert, new shoots will find a way to grow. In the 90s, country was forced into extremes to try and find a way to create an alternative, any alternative, as alt country was born.
Phone still ring, sing I'll sing, speakers are speaking in code. Well, what now? Well, anyhow, your prayers will never be answered again.
It's a catch-all for good songwriting. it's anything that's too old, too loud, or too weird for country radio. And in America, that leaves us an awful lot of territory we can cover.
Alt country was as much about the outsider attitude as it was about the style of music. It was spearheaded by bands like Wilco and Ryan Adams, with a mixed heritage of punk and country.
Laughing with your broken eyes, laughing with your lost time in love.
I think the alt-country movement has been one of the best things that's happened to country in terms of finding new audiences, breaking the molds, and loosening the music up.
It was loose enough to embrace the return of Johnny Cash as he played hip rock venues like the Viper Rooms in Los Angeles on his comeback in the 90s.
Walk in a sad rain, and I got a little tremolo when I talk, but I finally found out who I am. I'm a walking, talking miracle from Vietnam. Drive on.
Today, there's a lot of kids walking around with Johnny Cash t-shirts on, and some Hank Williams t-shirts, and it's bringing a lot of people together.
It don't mean nothing, it don't mean nothing. Drive on.
It's encouraged a lot of younger musicians to delve into the roots of music and to see what can be done with bringing that music into the modern era, making it sound contemporary. And when alt country does that, it's wonderful.
And few are better placed to do that than the grandson of the man regarded as the founder of modern country, Hank Williams.
Well, the stars are shining in that East Texas air. I'm over 50 minutes and I'm gonna be there. It's been a long drive. And the fingers go. My mama gave the water. How we going to join Tom tonight?
You need to pay respects to what made country what it is today. And all these guys in business suits and all these lawyers that outsmarted all the musicians, they're not the ones that really made this whole thing happen. It's definitely a passion that you feel inside. You gotta eat it, breathe it, live it.
Picking up pieces of my broken family was not an easy sight to see.
Hank Williams III typifies an attitude that goes right back to his grandfather. It's that same outsider cowboy streak of independence that's seen country music through the good times and the bad.
Well, the Nashville sound has kind of changed back and forth with commercialism, and what sold yesterday doesn't necessarily mean it's going to sell tomorrow, but I think the good stuff always manages to come to the top and always will.
I'm not worried about country music. I wasn't worried about it when they said it was dead before. It'll never die. It's about reality and about harmony and about, you know, it's as natural and beautiful as the, you know, the landscape.
The feelings of this worn out cowboy will make you feel so.
Next week on Lost Highway, the story of women in country. Once bit players in Nashville, women performers now dominate the country music business.
Stay with BBC4 for the Eagles in concert next.
The Lost Highway.